Okay, are there any questions? Up here to Tim.
Thanks. I've just got actually probably two questions for Jacqui or Corinne, or whoever wants to respond. I'm from Animal Welfare League, New South Wales. I have a real problem with a lot of the data that we collect and the interpretation of the data that we collect and the conclusions we come from the data we collect on a state and a national basis in Australia. We saw in your presentation what I think is a common misconception that we have nationally, which is that identified animals, microchipped and registered, equates to owned, and anything that's not identified, not microchipped, not registered, equals unowned. To me, that is a huge mistake, and it is just a complete distortion of what is actually going on in the pet population and with pet demographics. And I say that... Is this one? Oh, sorry, that was me. I've spent a lot of time in rescue and welfare. From the perspective of welfare groups like I know AWL in New South Wales, we only take owner surrenders. We take 5,000-6,000 animals a year. The number of owned animals surrendered to us that we have to dissex is over 80%. We're talking about probably 3/4 for dogs and 90% for cats. These are owned animals. These are owned, unmicrochipped, unregistered, undissexed animals. But when you look at the data, it says, 93% of owned cats are dissexed, 76% of owned dogs are dissexed. That is not owned dog, and it's not owned cat. It is identified owned animals. So it's a convenient way to look at the data is to say that if they're identified, they're owned. If they're not, they're unowned. To me, there is a very, very large population of owned, unregistered, unchipped, undissexed animals out there, and we are conveniently ignoring it because we can't quantify it. So to me, that is a complete distortion of what's happening, and it is very difficult for us to come to conclusions and propose solutions when we're misinterpreting what is going on. I'm not talking about you guys especially, but that is a very, very common statistic that is circulated, that the extent to which owners comply with regulation and microchipping and dissexing is high. To my mind, it is absolutely not the case. And it's not just AWL. You can talk to Joy or Denise or Silvana AWL Queensland. They'll have very similar desexing requirements of those animals. I know Sydney Dogs and Cats Home is the same. Lord Smith is the same. I can't speak for the RSPCA. But generally, the quality of the data that we receive, even New South Wales, the DLG will show the pound data. There is nothing in there about dissexing rates. There is nothing in there about whether they're registered or microchipped, and yet we were making conclusions about the data that to me are quite erroneous compared to what we are experiencing in welfare and rescue. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's clear that the data is only as good as what's entered. And one of the challenges is that there's all those different categorisations of what is a kitten, and I think we need to get together. And what has happened in America is to agree on how we're going to categorise things. Now, all data sets have some flaw, but you have to start. If you don't look at your data at all because you say it's all flawed, then why collect it? The data that shows 97% of Sydney cats are desexed, the data that shows 94% of owned Queensland cats are desexed, that's not from this data, that was from the Queensland Household Survey, where they divide Queensland up into areas and they make telephone calls. But and what we've presented today is national data. What we haven't done is showed an individual breakdown of states or of shelters, and it's very clear there are big differences between different areas and different challenges. If you're in a low socioeconomic area, the data shows very clearly that the number of animals that are going to be coming in and euthanised is proportional to the socioeconomic status. In fact, there was a really interesting study published from Boston where they looked at different shelters across Boston and the death rate, euthanasia rate in those various shelters. And they showed that it was highly correlated with the socioeconomic area status of the area, but it was even more strongly correlated with the premature death rate. That was drive-by shootings, knifings, drug overdoses. And so it shows that when you've got a dysfunctional community, that's where your biggest problems are. And so, you know, yes, some of you will have different data, but you have to start somewhere. And as Corinne said, I mean, she's got enough data to speak the whole afternoon and drill right down. And that's what has to happen. And you need to have data, I think, to know where the problems are and how you're going.
Corinne?
I just wanted to say that... Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say that was... I don't know if I made it clear enough, but that was sort of my point of showing the desexing data and that only 36% overall were actually were actually desexed. Is because we're told these figures that the identified owner, so there's such a high desexing rate, and as Jeff said yesterday, the 70% rule doesn't work, and my data actually backs that up, that the things that the cats that are coming into shelters aren't desexed and aren't microchipped and things like that.
Yeah, sure, I understand that. I just my point was that we're not acknowledging openly enough the deficiencies in the data. Like we need to, I understand your point about the data. We need to use what we have, but we need to change the way that we collect the data. We need more information from councils, and there's no reason why a pound cannot include microchip status and desexing status in animals that come in. And the second aspect of that is we need to, in acknowledging the limitations on the data, we need to get away from what we're doing now, which is saying owned animals, 90, because it's not owned animals, it is identified owned animals. And to my mind, it is largely a contributor due to the fact that we effectively, whether we want to do it in a regulatory or an open sense or not, we allow pretty much anyone to breed, and we allow pretty much anyone to buy an undersexed animal, and we pretty much allow anyone who's got enough money to have that animal go around the veterinary profession completely, because of the number of channels that we have for people who are able to purchase animals, whether it's online, directly from breeders, however it is, pet shops, however it happens to be. You have the ability to not microchip, not register, not desex your pet, and in fact you may not even receive information about any of those things as to why it's a good idea, so that you have all these people who are continually acquiring pets that remain in that position and do never go and see a vet, but because we can't identify them, we effectively exclude them from the analysis that we undertake and the conclusions that we reach. So all I'm suggesting is it would be great if we change the way that we collect our data and that we acknowledge the limitations of the data that we have.
I think that's clear. And what is clear, as Corinne said, her data showed, I think it was 64% of adult cats being surrendered were desexed, and that's clearly quite different from the 94 or 97% when you do broader surveys. So there's something different about these people that surrender cats. And that's, you know that the people that are working on the ground level know that these people don't often typify the ideal owner.
But there's also, you've got to look at some of the data that says that 90 whatever percentage are desexed too, because some of that, if you drill down, is not appropriate either. But we're running out of time, and I've got that in a presentation tomorrow, so I might be able to look at that as well, because some of that data is not appropriate either. Are there any other quick questions? Because we do need to go to lunch. But that was we could spend hours on this because there's so much data there. And I'd like to congratulate Corinne on the many hours and hours and hours she must have taken in putting into sorting that data, because I know just for doing it for the Gold Coast alone is mammoth, and if you're doing it Australia-wide, it must be amazing. And thank you, Jacqui, for your commitment to this issue, because I think that's so important. And I'd also like to pass on thanks to RSPCA, because we still have groups in Australia who don't want to publish their data, and RSPCA have been very open about their data, and we have to be open about our data. So I'd like to pass on thanks to RSPCA for that as well.